All right, now we bring you to a question being posed by D.C. council members this week. What if a candidate needed more than half of the votes to win an election? Not a novel concept, but that's not how things work right now in D.C. 7 D.C. council members have signed onto a bill that proposes a different system. It's called ranked choice voting. You may have heard about this. They just used it in the Democratic primary for New York City mayor. Here's how it works. Instead of voting for just one candidate, you rank your choices on the ballot. If a candidate gets more than half of the vote, of course, they win. But if no one does, here's what happens next. The candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, but whoever voters ranked second after that losing candidate, those votes get added to the other candidate's total until someone passes 50%. Now, proponents say this would make elections fairer. Others worry it renders an already complicated voting system even more confusing. It was hard for me just to say it there clearly. So D.C. Councilmember Christina Henderson introduced that legislation for ranked choice voting, and we're happy to have her join us to talk about it. So first up, Councilmember, your pitch. Why would this be better for D.C. voters?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. The impetus around ranked choice voting is to ensure that voters' voices are fully heard. As we get more competitive in our elections, take my election, for example, I was elected in November. There were 24 people on the ballot. And so it wasn't necessarily fair, I would say, to voters in the fact that, I won with 15% of the vote. Actually, no one got 50% of the vote in my race. And so this would change that.
Yeah, I definitely have to give you credit for this proposal because just like what you just said, there's no guarantee you would have won your seat under this system. There was about 15,000 votes that separated you from third place. So why is this the fair system to go with? Why not just implement a runoff system, say, for the top vote getters?
Well, so this is another word for, or another term for ranked choice voting is instant runoff voting, meaning that instead of paying for an entirely new election, the runoff basically happens instantaneously.
Now, the biggest challenge after, of course, getting this passed would be getting people to understand how it works. This is the November ballot. I'm showing people this on the screen, and it's really small words, but basically the ballot under ranked choice voting for D.C. in 2024, if this passes, would look a whole lot more complicated than this. So what's the process for letting people know how this would work?
Well, so the bill that we introduced contains what I consider a very aggressive voter public education campaign. Ranked choice voting is only as good as the voters are able to understand what happened. And I think what we learned from other jurisdictions who have used this, including New York City, which is the latest and largest jurisdiction, frankly, is that if you don't have a voter education campaign that's on the ground using, all the various infrastructure, press, civic organizations, community organizations, et cetera, explaining to folks how this works, it won't work. But the fact of the matter is, how we vote for even at-large members now, a lot of people don't really understand. A lot of people don't understand that you don't have to, but that you can vote for 2 people in that race. And so we already have a number of voters in the district who aren't necessarily fully exercising their vote because they're only choosing one candidate. Right.
Take us along for the ride here. You've introduced this bill. There are 6 other council members who have signed on. What are the next steps? What's the timeline in putting this into practice?
Well, so I don't serve on the Committee of the Judiciary, which is where this bill would be referred to. Sometime in the fall, hopefully the Judiciary Committee would hold a hearing on this bill to allow everyone's voice to be heard in terms of whether or not you like the idea, whether or not there are things that we should change, all of those pieces moving forward. And then if the Committee on Judiciary finds this favorable enough to move forward, then we'll move forward. But this bill would not be implemented for this upcoming election. Let me repeat, it would not be implemented for 2022. This is something that we are anticipating for 2024 to give plenty of time to not only fund it, but also for the DC Board of Elections to do their work.
Yeah, and of course there's no guarantee here. The mayor so far is uncommitted, so you're going to have to spend some time to try to talk her into this. So much more to learn about this. We really appreciate you coming on and talking with us about it because it is a very complicated process to be able to explain, but as you argue, one that you feel is a more fair way for D.C. voters' voices to be heard. So, Councilmember, thank you so much for coming on with us tonight.
Thank you, and I look forward to the spirited debate with my colleagues and the community on this matter.